Good evening. My name is Jason Wallace. I am the pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church here in the Salt Lake Valley. It's good to have you with us again. We welcome you to another episode of The Ancient Paths. It's our privilege this evening to welcome Alma Allred to be a guest with us. Mr. Allred is a longtime instructor at the LDS Institute of Religion at the University of Utah. He has made presentations to historical bodies, also has contributed to the Farms Review of Books, and done a lot of other things in terms of LDS faith and apologetics. It's a great privilege to have him here with us this evening. Before we go into our interview with him and open up the phone lines a little bit after that, I'd like to explain a little bit about what we're doing. We're hoping this evening to do something a little bit different. We've done debates for years, and we hope that this will complement them. We're going to still be doing debates in upcoming years. We're actually doing one January 25th. I'll be debating Martin Tanner at the University of Utah over whether Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. And that format of debate, I think, is very productive. I think it's great to have a very defined subject and to offer different opinions and really sort of do a battle of ideas. We're going to continue doing that, but also we want to dialogue, not just in terms of a more combative kind of debate format, but also enter into more of a dialogue in terms of exchanging ideas on things. Since we've been here, we've tried to chart a course between two extremes that seem to dominate to a great extent. We're not unique in what we're trying to do, but I think that unfortunately it's been hard for people to find the middle ground. On the one hand, among evangelicals dealing with Latter-day Saints, you have people who are very critical of the LDS, and yet they seem almost incapable of actually engaging them and speaking the truth in love and hearing them out in terms of what they actually believe and carrying on a conversation. Then on the other hand, you have people that seem to be so interested in the relationship that they seem almost incapable of critiquing what the LDS actually believe. And so what we're trying to do is to have a respectful dialogue about the things that we believe. And there are going to be things that we agree on, and there are going to be things that we disagree on. And hopefully there's going to be some light shed on misconceptions in some areas, but also there's going to be engagement on things where we actually believe very different things. The LDS scriptures in the Pearl of Great Price say that Presbyterianism is not true. That's a quote from Joseph Smith's history where he says, "I've learned from myself that Presbyterianism is not true." We tend to live in a very politically correct age where people, whenever someone challenges what they believe, they start whining that they're being picked on. We don't go off in a corner and throw rocks and try to demonize Latter-day Saints that we're being picked on because they say that we're wrong. We say, let's be good Bereans and sit down and discuss it. We believe that Mormonism is wrong. We believe that we have a different God and a different gospel. And we like to talk about these things. We like to bring them to the bar of God's Word. We like to engage people. And we think that by showing respect, we can actually better understand one another, and we can have a disagreement and yet be good neighbors. And I think that that provides the best of what both groups on the extremes want without some of the problems. So that's the basic idea of what we're going to be trying to do tonight. We're going to start off with some discussion. And I'd like to begin by asking Alma to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you mentioned, I have a strong interest in the LDS faith and in defending it. My vocation, though, I work for the University of Utah, which I guess does not necessarily mean I'm speaking for them. I'm certainly not, because it's a secular institution. But I also teach, for the most part, I teach LDS church history. Occasionally I've taught a New Testament, but I am a lifelong Latter-day Saint. I've served in many different capacities, and I served a mission in Italy, and you and I have I think, been friends for several years now, and strangely, I'm also a good friend of James White.
He said to tell you hello.
Okay, good. And our friendship goes back more than 20 years. So
tell me something. Do you think I'm picking on you when I say that I think Mormonism's wrong?
Oh, no, not at all. But I'm also thick-skinned. I think you wouldn't be true to yourself if you didn't make that position, take that position, and be vocal about it. And I don't necessarily think you feel picked on if I say that I agree with Joseph Smith when he said that he learned for himself that Presbyterianism is not true.
Unfortunately, the LDS are not the only ones who think that. There's a whole host of people that would be standing in line trying to join in that chorus. I'm curious. You know, I'm coming from outside. I've lived here nearly 10 years, but I've never been a Latter-day Saint. I've been around a lot of Latter-day Saints, talked to them. I'm curious about what your impressions are and what you see, you know, having taught so many college-age people in the university. What would you see as the general impression of Latter-day Saints towards evangelicals in terms of some of these things? Because, I mean, it is... I mean, that's an open question because there's a lot of different approaches.
Well, and it's hard to quantify that because I think, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. A lot of evangelicals that Latter-day Saints see are those that are the street preachers around Temple Square during conference time. And they have I think that's a distorted perception of Christianity at large. I think there's also, you know, like you say, it's open-ended. It depends on a lot of people's experience. I think in some respects, in the history of Mormonism, there's been kind of a negative attitude towards Catholicism. But as I went to Italy, the seat of the Catholic Church, I came back with a very favorable impression of Catholicism, or maybe shall I say, of Catholics.
Understood.
I found I had discussions with cardinals and a lot of pastors of all stripes, and I came back with really a favorable attitude towards the hierarchy of the Catholic Church that I had interacted with. So I think it depends on how and with whom you have interacted. I think we have, you know, I have college-age young men in my classes. Many of them are returned missionaries, and they've have varied experiences, and it's colored by what they've seen.
I'm curious, you know, I'm an outside observer. We used to help James with some of the handing out of tracts that he did at General Conference, but it got to be so much of a circus down there that we backed off because there was just so many strange groups. I don't know if you saw, Fred Phelps was in town a number of years ago, and he had signs up, "This way to the fag church," which I'm going, what? I mean, I don't understand some of the protesters. They seem to be coming from very strange directions. And James White actually came up, introduced himself to Fred Phelps, and introduced that he had debated Barry Lynn over the subject of homosexuality. And it seemed to be, you know, he identified himself as a Baptist. And then he asked him, he said, you know, I understand, you know, what you, some of your positions, but what do you make of the command that we're supposed to speak the truth in love? And, you know, James is a bodybuilder, and but here's Fred Phelps. He shoves his fingers into his chest and he says, "You hate God and I hate you." Now, you know, that's just one. I mean, that's not the typical street preachers, but it seems like that there's developed this sort of weird codependency between the folks going to conference and the street preachers, because the street preachers, I've never heard that much of an offense in the actual message. Now the way they do it is offensive. You know, they take a Book of Mormon and drag it on the ground, and I remember one of the guys saying, "If you were doing this to the Bible, I'd be fighting you about now." And you know, accusations of the grossest immorality towards people that they've never even met. I mean, yeah, we're sinners. I mean, I don't back off that in the least. But to make specific accusations of specific sexual sin towards 14 and 15-year-old girls, I mean, I've never understood that, but they seem to understand that the gospel is supposed to provide an offense. Their message doesn't really get into much depth, and so they create an offense by the way they do it. And then the LDS turn around and they start singing hymns, because it's almost like they're basking in the rejection and you know, we're being persecuted just like our forefathers. And the street preachers go away pleased because they're being rejected, and they account it to the gospel, even though the gospel, I
haven't seen it preached.
Yeah, I mean, I've rarely heard any content. I mean, I won't repeat all the different things I've heard, but Jesus sort of gets mentioned in passing. I'm curious, what has been the feedback from some of your students towards that kind of thing? We used to get a lot of people who would come up to our book tables. We do evangelistic book tables, especially at the U, and people would come up, "Are you with those street preachers?" And we would say, "No, that's not us. You know, we have spoken to them directly. We've rebuked them for what they're doing because it's unbiblical. Not the preaching, but what passes as preaching. You know, if they were actually preaching, that would be a different matter. I mean, I've heard people who have inarticulately and sometimes with good intentions but not the best sensibilities have actually tried to be faithful in declaring a message. But most of the guys that I've heard down there, you know, they're mocking garments. They're talking about Joseph Smith and hell. They're talking about a whole host of things that really don't deal with who is God, who is man, what is sin, who is Jesus Christ, what is salvation, anything like that. But I'm curious, what do they typically see that as a fringe, or do they see that as more mainstream?
No, I think they definitely see it as a fringe, and I also think that they, by and large, see them as not being credible. And almost laughable if they weren't so offensive. So I think most people recognize that these are not. Although Mormons are reluctant to say these are not Christians, but they don't get the perception that these people are offering them anything that is beneficial, that is lovely, or of good report, or praiseworthy. Those just are not evidenced by the way they're handling themselves.
There's an irony to someone like myself in seeing some of the exchanges that take place, because I mean, you teach LDS history. You know, it seemed to an outsider the LDS emphasis in the early years seemed to be very much on the second coming and a very pessimistic view of the current state of affairs.
They just didn't know how bad it was going to get.
Well, I mean, you know, they were very much premillennial and very much you know, millenarian in their view of things. But now it's almost as if the LDS have become postmillennial. You know, historically, people were being gathered to Zion for the second coming. Was a great emphasis, whereas now it seems that the LDS have made much more of a home for themselves in the current age, and there's still some of those emphases. I'm not denying that, but a lot of the fundamentalists have the same very negative view. You know, this is the last generation. This is just a sign of. You know, I hear people sometimes will tell me, you know, don't you think the Mormons are, you know, a sign that this is the last generation? It's like, they've been around for a long time. You know, we're what, 177 years now since the formation of, or since the publishing of the Book of Mormon. Soon to be 178, and it's just funny their very negative view of things, and you see that in the fundamentalist LDS. You know, I'm not sure what term you prefer for the.
Well, you know, when you get into a Christian setting, when you talk about fundamentalists, a lot of times people don't know what we're talking about. But I'm really reluctant to quantify them as fundamentalist Mormons because I don't consider them Mormons. But
understood.
Yeah.
But they, you know, people like the Parowan prophet folks.
Yeah.
You know, you know, everything is a sign of the end. And then you've got some of the street preachers, very much in that same vein. But
I think, though, if you were to look at the teachings of the early church leaders, particularly Brigham Young and Joseph Smith, the reason they wanted the people to gather together was because the primary reason for that was to build temples. In the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, you couldn't send money very easily across the country or across the continent, or you know, from England to the United States in order to build a temple. You basically had to have the labor there. And Brigham Young commented several times that the reason that we were going to the Rocky Mountains was so that we could grow in strength, where we could cope with mobs and build temples.
I'm curious, you know, this is sort of a tangent, but there's a book called The Forgotten Kingdom. I forget the author's name, published by Utah State University, where the author, I spoke with him one time, I don't remember if it's in the book itself, but he mentioned a book, I think it was by one of the Pratts, that they were looking forward, they wrote a book in about 1844, and they were looking forward to 1944 or something like this. Are you familiar with the work? I'm pulling it from my head.
I believe it was Parley P. Pratt, and I think it wasn't a book; it was more of a pamphlet. But I think it was published in 1842, 42 or 43. Sometime it was before Joseph Smith had been killed, and but I mean, I think Parley P. Pratt expected the United States to dissolve within 10 years. I mean, this is
but the emphasis there was that they were looking forward 100 years to being in the millennial reign, and they would be laying the foundations for a new city in North America when they come across the ruins of New York. And so anyway, I want to shift focus though. You get this kind of response from one direction, but I've been struck by sort of the responses from the more neo-evangelical direction. Back 3 years ago, it's been just over 3 years ago now, Ravi Zacharias came to the Salt Lake Tabernacle, and in that presentation, Dr. Richard Mao, who is the president of Fuller Theological Seminary in California, came and he apologized. He made the following statement. He says, I know that I have learned much in this continuing dialogue, and I am now convinced that we evangelicals have often seriously misrepresented the beliefs and practices of the Mormon community. Indeed, let me state it bluntly to the LDS folks here this evening. We have sinned against you. The God of the Scriptures makes it clear that it is a terrible thing to bear false witness against our neighbors, and we have been guilty of that sort of transgression in things we have said about you. We have told you what we believe, or we have told you what you believe without making a sincere effort, first of all, to ask you what you believe. Now, that apology stirred up a lot of contention among the evangelicals, and so he defended himself, and among what he gave as a response, he said, he said that I've received emails in the past few days where evangelicals have said that Mormonism teaches that God was once a human being like us, and we can become gods just like God now is. Mormon leaders have specifically stated that such a teaching, while stated by past leaders, is something they don't understand and has no functioning place in present-day Mormon doctrine. Do you think that that is a legitimate conclusion on Dr. Mao's part?
No, I think he went a little bit beyond the mark. I think he was accurately reflecting that Mormonism has been maligned falsely in many instances. But I think we get into a kind of a gray area here. I don't think that there's any question that Mormons believe in theosis or deification, that previous prophets have taught that God was once a man. However, I think from that point, a lot of our critics want to delve into that, and they want to know more about that. And we have to say, we don't know any more about it than that. What we do know is that our prophets have taught that God was once a man. And when people say, that can't be true, I say, well, Jesus Christ is God. He was once a man. And I think if it's true for Christ, it could be true for his Father. But there has been a de-emphasis of that over the years, I think particularly because people want to know more about that. And people need to understand that in Mormon theology we have a canon, and that things that go beyond the canon aren't necessarily church doctrine. They may be true, they may not be. So I think it's difficult. I know President Hinckley has over the past said that commentary on God becoming God is inappropriate simply because we don't know anything about that.
The old couplet by, was it Lorenzo Snow? As man is now, God once was, as God is now, man may become. That kind of teaching seems to have been, it continues to be present in some of your teaching materials, things like this. I mean,
absolutely.
Achieving a celestial marriage, is that still current?
As a institute manual, I think was it an institute manual?
I think it was. I think it was
or a Sunday school manual. I'm not sure which one.
I think it was a Sunday
school manual. It still may be current, but the new Joseph Smith manual that Priesthood and Relief Society are going to study in this coming year includes a quote from Joseph Smith's King Follett Discourse that God was once a man. I mean, that's still in our teachings. But if you want to know more about that, I'd have to say I'm sorry. I don't know anything more about it.
As sort of a follow-up to what happened at the Tabernacle, Mao actually encouraged Millet to, I think, repackage one of his books, or not necessarily just repackage, but write something in the same vein as what he had written under a different title, and to have it published by Erdman's out of Grand Rapids, a historically evangelical publisher. And Mao wrote in the foreword. He wrote the foreword and afterwards. Actually, he wrote
the flyleaf on the back. I remember reading that.
Yeah, he said, I think that an open-minded Christian reader of this book will sense that Bob Millet is in fact trusting in the Jesus of the Bible for his salvation. That is certainly my sense. We're hearing competing voices. We've got folks like Mao, and the book was recommended by a host of very prominent evangelicals. You've got folks like that keep saying within evangelical circles that the LDS Church is changing dramatically. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the paradigms for them is the Worldwide Church of God, which after the death of Herbert W. Armstrong changed radically. Mm-hmm. And I think that the hope of folks is that as the LDS are becoming sort of warmer and fuzzier in their dialogue, that eventually we're just going to be so winsome that this is going to usher in this this radical change. As an outsider, I don't see that changing, because the whole dynamic in the Worldwide Church of God was very different. In Mormonism, you can't get rid of celestial exaltation without getting rid of the whole. I mean,
without deleting a couple of sections of the Doctrine and Covenants.
Well,
there's no question about that.
I mean, basically, everything holds together as one piece. You have to get rid of the temples. You have to get rid of the priesthood. You have to get rid of everything. Mm-hmm. It either all hangs together or it all collapses together. Now,
so I agree with you. You're not going to see a redefinition of LDS terms. I think what you will see, though, as we continue to move into the information age, misrepresentations about us hopefully will decrease. I mean, I used to hear all the time people would say, Mormons don't believe that Jesus Christ is God. And I'd say, where do you get that? They've been teaching that for years. Well, you look, the first publication of the LDS movement is the Book of Mormon, and the flyleaf, the beginning sentence says that the Book of Mormon exists to convince Jew and Gentile that Jesus Christ is the eternal God.
I understand, and we have often radically different definitions of some of these things. I mean, what I've argued in some of my debates is that the problem with Mormonism is not polytheism; it's atheism. Because, I mean, and I'm not just trying to be pejorative in that sense, but from a biblical sense, we're not using even the term God in the same way. But as evangelicals have really become much more emotional, much more subjective, and focus much more on experience rather than a core of doctrine as the basis of that experience, it's been very interesting to watch how their interaction with LDS have changed. We were involved in some interfaith dialogue that one of our elders was instrumental in organizing that up at the U, and it was great because it was actual dialogue. Sit down, talk, disagree, and
it was enjoyable. It went on a lot longer than we expected it to.
Yeah, but then we got in. There was a change in leadership at the Institute, and they had brought in some evangelicals that had not been willing to participate before. And before we knew it, all of a sudden things had changed. There was not to be any more discussion of doctrine and things like this. We were to worship together. And when we brought it up to one of the evangelical leaders, I was like, we're not really worshiping the same God. We're not really, we're taking a very historic doctrinal position. We like the LDS. We think highly of them. We really enjoy these dialogues, but we're skipping over all the issues and jumping to the end. And in the dialogue that took place among the evangelicals, we were told that we were completely out of place, that what was going to be winsome to the LDS was not talking about who is God, who is man, what is sin, things like that, but rather when you get exposed to modern praise and worship, that y'all were just going to dump your old boring stuff and come running, to start singing choruses with everyone else. And they're actually, I don't know if you would agree with this perspective, it seemed like for the short time that it lasted, it was almost like there was this attempt to out-emote one another. I mean, not that the LDS were doing that so much, but it was very much an emotional experience. Here's what I've experienced. And in some of the discussions with some of the LDS, they kind of welcomed that because they thought they did it better. And I kind of agreed with them. Now, you may consider me all wet on that, but it was kind of frustrating where we go from where we're discussing things of content to where we're, and not devoid of feelings, not just, it wasn't like lectures and things like this, but to where all of a sudden it's just, let's share our feelings.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do have a slightly different perspective, because the change in the leadership that it was probably my fault. I was uncomfortable at the Institute. We always open every meeting we have at the Institute with a prayer, and we were willing to have anyone pray who was there, and as I understood it, there were several who said, "We can't pray with you because we are on such diametrically opposite poles of the spectrum that we can't pray in the same room with you." And my position was, if we can't be comfortable praying in the Institute of Religion, it's not a meeting that we should be holding in the Institute of Religion, being sponsored by the Institute of Religion. I think, my position was, if we can't pray, it's probably not going to be a beneficial experience.
Yeah, I sympathize with your position in that it was actually taking place in the Institute, but you know, the subject of prayer is a sensitive one. A lot of conservative Lutherans won't even pray with me. There was a Evangelical Lutheran Synod pastor down in West Jordan, South Jordan, something like that, that I knew before he went off to, I think it was Eastern Europe, that we got along pretty well, but he told me up front, he said, I can't pray with you because they're very, because of their whole understanding of communion, and I said, oh well, I can deal with that.
Well, it was a learning experience for me there.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious what your perspective is in terms of the LDS view of broader evangelicalism. You have fundamentalism, which I'm using that term. We get accused of being fundamentalists, so I mean it's one of those terms that's often used pejoratively. But
no one likes to be called a fundamentalist, I don't think.
I don't know. Some people wear it as a badge of honor. I got along much better with my father-in-law when I identified myself as one.
Oh, okay.
He was Baptist and wasn't too thrilled with his daughter seeing a Presbyterian, but
had to happen.
It's a shibboleth for some folks. But I'm curious, in some of the exchange that takes place with evangelicals, the evangelicals are trying to provide an alternative, but that alternative seems like it ends up coming up empty in a lot of areas in terms of, there are people who consider more LDS evangelism as simply bashing Joseph Smith, or simply bashing the whole idea of a church, telling people, you don't need a church, you just need Jesus. Well, you can't, it's true that people can substitute religion for a real relationship with Christ. The Pharisees are a great example. But can we really divorce the bride from the bridegroom? What's your perspective of the sort of very loose ecclesiology, the understanding of the church that you hear from evangelicals? Is that considered a stumbling block for a lot of folks, or a great deficiency?
Yeah, I would consider it a great deficiency. I mean, of course, it isn't as strongly evident in other translations as it is in the King James Bible, but we see the church itself as a very important vehicle, since we believe that there's a necessary element of ordinances, that those ordinances must be orderly, and they without the church there isn't the order that we perceive as necessary. Of course, following the teachings of Joseph Smith.
Yeah, and one of the frustrating things for me when I hear sort of a typical Latter-day Saint and a typical evangelical having a discussion where there's theology involved, is you end up with the evangelical quoting Ephesians 2:8 and 9. For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. And then the Latter-day Saint will counter with James 2. And we see that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. And they end up playing ping pong with each other. And
myself, I would agree with the Ephesians. I'd say, well, I'm all aboard.
And I think that once you read verse 10, all of a sudden a whole lot of things fall into place, but a lot of folks don't want to read verse 10 because they have a very cheap grace view of things. They don't want to, verse 10 says that we are, we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus unto good works that he has ordained that we should walk therein. Bad paraphrase. but the call to holiness is there, and yet there's not a full warped picture in either direction. And it's also frustrating that the evangelicals often have this very individualistic, very vertical view in terms of, all that really matters is my relationship with Jesus. And the Latter-day Saints look and say, there is a church, and it's not just an invisible church. There's elders, there's accountability, there's
apostles, prophets. Yeah.
Well, we would agree
in our perspective, there
right,
are.
and we would disagree in terms of some of those continuing offices.
Yeah.
But it just seems like because there's not a full warped picture, it's often confusing. We have. Oh, I thought we had a caller on. We're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines. The phone number is 973-TV20. That's 973-8820. And we're going to continue some of our discussion, but we welcome your phone calls.
I think very often people wait to call till they have the number. So,
I'm tempted to do a bad joke, but I won't make it. But I'm curious, how much of a change do you see? The LDS Church obviously has had changes. The doing away with polygamy. You have the manifesto, D&C 132 still in place, but there's been a clear rejection of Warren Jeffs and the Kingstons and some of your cousins and things like this. There's been the change in the Adam God teaching in terms of that being taught by Brigham Young, but then not taught by others. And I know that's a subject for another. We won't run down that rabbit trail tonight. But the admission of blacks to the priesthood. In terms of some of the articulations that you hear, when you go back and you look at, especially like Orson Pratt, or even more recently, Bruce McConkie, you had a very clear antithesis between the LDS Church and everyone else. And now the articulations are not in that clear dichotomy that there's us and there's everyone else, but there's this much more warm and fuzzy articulation of things. There was, I don't know if you saw the ones that just came out. Mitt Romney had asked for clarification on some of the LDS doctrines, but
Mitt Romney, or Fox News had. Are you saying?
It was connected with Fox News. I maybe
due to Romney's run. Yeah, they had the Fox News asked the LDS Church for clarification of some statements.
We'll come back to that. We've got some callers. We have Ken on line 1 from Draper. Ken, good to have you with us.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to ask your LDS friend there if he's seen the thing on TV with Mitt Romney when he said that the Mormons didn't believe that that Satan was Jesus Christ's brother, and being an ex-Mormon, I was taught that, and so I just want to get his viewpoint on that.
I didn't see Mitt Romney denying that, so I'm not aware of that. I followed it pretty closely. I'm surprised if he did.
I think I've got some. Let's see. I think I'm trying to see here. We've got the questions that were asked.
I think while you're looking for it, I think Mormons are uncomfortable with the way it's said rather than what it means. Mm-hmm. And I say it's like, and I think you and I have talked about this before. I've said, well, of course you believe in human sacrifice. Well, no, I don't. Well, yes, you do, because you believe that God was God in human flesh and that He was sacrificed. Ergo,
I'm not winsome. I just agree.
Yes, but it doesn't sound good to say you believe in human sacrifice, but we do believe in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, who was God in human flesh. And so, but we say it in more delicate terms, in more acceptable things. And so, in the LDS Church clarified that. They started out by saying, well, that's a pretty typical negative element, but we do believe that God is the Father of all the spirits, and that the angels are the spirits, and we are spirits, and so technically we are all brothers and sisters.
And one of the other doctrines that was addressed was whether Elohim was the physical father of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking for the exact question. Let's see. Does the Mormon Church believe that God and Mary had physical sex to conceive Jesus? And the answer that was given, the Church does not claim to know how Jesus was conceived, but believes the Bible and Book of Mormon references to Jesus being born of the Virgin Mary.
And that's what I've been teaching for 20 years.
But now, you go back and you look at some of the citations from guys like Joseph Fielding Smith. I mean, weren't they saying that this was a physical, that he was created in just the same way that every other child was born of parents?
I think you can come up with that conclusion, but I think probably one of the best explanations comes from James Talmage in his book, Jesus the Christ, where he says that the birth of the Savior was not in I think the word may be contravention of natural law, but a higher manifestation thereof. Now, what that means, I don't know, but I certainly don't teach that Christ was the product of physical relations between Mary and the Father. I don't know how it occurred, but I do know that the Book of Mormon says that after Christ was born, that she was still referred to as a virgin. And I think Ezra Taft Benson emphasized that during his administration when he was president of the church.
How do you take some of the things, especially, it seems like everyone's trying to, not everyone, but a lot of people are trying to distance themselves from some of the very dogmatic statements made by Bruce McConkie and others, just a generation ago, where things seem to be said much more clearly, much more in a distinct way. McConkie in Mormon doctrine says, evil spirits control much of the so-called religious worship in the world. For instance, the great creeds of Christendom were formulated so as to conform to their whispered promptings. Now, it's popular for everybody to take swipes at the Nicene Creed these days, but I kind of like that because the lines are clear. It's like we're saying here's where we stand. Was McConkie speaking for the church, or
certainly not? In fact, that's probably from Mormon doctrine, wasn't it?
Right.
This is something that a lot of people don't understand about the hierarchy of doctrine. That our doctrine is encapsulated in the Scriptures, and if there's to be more doctrine, the president of the church will add that to the Scriptures. Everything beyond that is commentary. And I generally agree with, I would say 99.6% of everything that Bruce R. McConkie taught. I think he was a great theologian. But I think he went overboard on a couple of instances.
I'd love to discuss with you, and maybe we'll do this if we can get together another time. It seems as if some of the things I've heard from his son, Joseph Fielding McConkie, have shown a little bit of uncomfortableness with some of the things coming from some of the guys like Millett and Stephen Robinson. But
I'm uncomfortable on both ends.
Understood. We have Terry from Layton on line 2. Terry, good to have you with us.
Hello, I enjoy your show.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to ask, you both stated your belief that Jesus is God, and I was wondering if you could both clarify what you mean in regards to your respective positions, and I'll just hang up and listen.
Okay.
That's tough.
I'll let you go first.
It is LDS doctrine that that he who created the earth was Jesus Christ. He was the one who spoke and said, "Let there be light." I don't know how much clearer that can be, other than when the Old Testament refers to the Lord Jehovah, it's talking about the person of Jesus Christ.
Well,
Generally.
And I'll articulate mine in a little bit different fashion, because my understanding, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth and argue with you what you believe,
Sure.
but in contrast to what I understand to be the LDS position, which is that there are a plurality of gods, and that we all started as eternal intelligences and became eternal through progression, became spirit children, and were given bodies to prove our worthiness through mortal probation and celestial exaltation, etc. My belief is that there is one God. The Father is God, the Son is God, the Spirit is God. Yet the Father is not the Son. It's not the Son is not the Spirit. They're not. It's not modalism, where God is simply portraying Himself in different forms. But there's one God in three persons. How does that work? I'm a finite, puny little creature living on a speck of dust in this creation. My understanding is that God is not part of the created order, and that matter is eternal, as I would understand the LDS position, but that God transcends His creation, and that He created it in such a way that He is intimate with His creation, and yet He transcends it. And so the infinite, eternal Creator of the universe, the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, became a man. He lived the perfect life that we were called to live, fulfilled the law, but then exchanged places with us. He took our sins upon Himself, that we might have His righteousness counted to us. He took our sins to the cross. And so the picture that back in Genesis, when God confirms the covenant with Abraham, and He kills and divides the animals, and there's a theophany of God. There's a smoking pot passing between the pieces. Typically, you would have two parties to that covenant. And God took upon Himself that curse. And so that with our breaking of the covenant, He receives the curse. He takes the curse upon Himself. Jesus is the one in Isaiah 6. We're told in the Gospel of John, I think it's chapter 12, roughly, that the vision in Isaiah 6 where the angels are crying, "Holy, holy, holy, the whole earth is filled with His glory." It says that was Jesus. They beheld His glory. We have Monty from North Ogden on line 3. Monty, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much. You'd made some comments about changes. You'd referred, let me get where I'm getting feedback. You referred to the issues of blacks in the priesthood and polygamy. I'd like to get a response, if I could, from Mr. Allred relative to the 132nd section on polygamy. If you look at both manifestos, obviously the church, and you made comments about the Jeffs and so forth, that we no longer practice polygamy in the LDS Church, at least the present time. But it appears to me, looking at 132, that polygamy is still practiced in modern terminology across the veil, in as much as those polygamous relationships have been entered into do continue beyond this life. And I think Elder Oaks, for example, being an example, I think has been recently sealed to another wife. I'd just like to get Mr. Allred's opinion on polygamy beyond the veil, and I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
Thank you very much for calling us.
Yeah, I think he basically nailed it. The doctrine, as far as we are concerned, continues to exist. One of my best friends married a woman who died in the process of time, and he married again. We do not practice concurrent polygamy today, but the doctrine is still in section 132. the manifesto did not cancel the doctrine. It simply ceased the practice. And if you look in Book of Mormon times, the beginning of the Book of Mormon, the Nephites were commanded not to practice plural marriage. But in that passage it also says that God, should He decide otherwise, He would command His people. And so we see that the command may be given and may be revoked, but the principle remains.
I'm curious, how do you see the official status of the manifesto? Because it's never actually been put in as one of the numbered Doctrine and Covenants, correct?
Well, it's not a number, but it has been voted upon. It was voted on actually it was September 29th of 1890. It is canon. It is part of our Scripture. Whether it has a number after it or not, I guess it does in Official Declaration 1. But it was presented before the body of the church, and the body of the church voted on it, and it became our doctrine.
With all the redefinition of marriage that's taking place, how would you articulate to a polygamist why, when it is now potentially legal, I mean, it's not in the state of Utah, but now U.S. law doesn't prohibit it.
Well, it's still prohibited in Utah.
Yeah, still
right.
prohibited in Utah, but why not practice it in other parts of the world where it's legal? Why? And if it becomes legal, if people succeed in redefining marriage to, whatever people want it to be, why not bring it back?
Well, it would be at the discretion of God, as we understand it, through His prophet, and that's what I would tell fundamentalists. Whether it's legal or not in the secular world, it's been prohibited in the church by the president of the church, and we believe that only one man on the earth at a time can authorize it, and that man is today Gordon B. Hinckley. And if the United States were to authorize it, he would still have to bring before the body of the church a principle that would say the manifesto is now being revoked.
I'm curious for your feedback on a recent change that was made to the introduction to the Book of Mormon. In the edition since 1981, you had a statement from Bruce McConkie. It says, after thousands of years, all were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. And they've now changed that to where it says, after thousands of years, all were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are among the ancestors of the American Indians.
Yeah, there are a couple of items of commentary that I'm not comfortable with, and I think that was an example of his own opinion. Fortunately, we hadn't canonized the introduction, but the Book of Mormon, I think, needs to be taken for what it says. And it doesn't say anything about who is here after 400 A.D. Or even, I don't personally believe that it's an exhaustive account of everyone who lived in this hemisphere. So, very possible there are many other people who are not descendants of Lehi.
There are a whole host of things I'd love to run down, but we're going to be running out of time. We have Douglas from Murray on line 1. Douglas, good to have you with us.
Yeah, good evening. One of the statements that the church is known for is the one that states that as man is, God once was, and as God is, man may become, which I would assume is part of the law of progression that takes us through millions of years and thousands of gods like the God we have, like Jesus, the God of this earth. And so the question I have is, do the Mormons truly believe that there are thousands of worlds out there where there are gods that progress through time and eternity from being a man to being a god? It says in the Bible that God was a spirit. That I hear the terms Alpha and Omega, that God was from the beginning to now and forever. Most Christian religions believe in one God and one God only. forever and forever and forever, from the beginning to now and forever. And so, yeah, I'm curious as to how they, and even the astronomers and the Hubble telescope and some of the many new things that are coming out in studying the stars.
Douglas, we're running out of time. You need to.
Millions of them, but there are probably very few spheres of existence that would allow human
Douglas.
life or any life at all
Douglas.
to be there. This may be
Douglas.
the only one. So,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We've
okay.
got a little over a minute left. Can you give him a quick response?
A quick response. I have trouble when people bring up and they say the God of this world is Jesus Christ. According to the New Testament, the God of this world is not Jesus Christ. In that perspective.
Depends on your perspective.
But,
context,
in Mormon thought, I mean, you read the first chapter of Moses, it says that Jesus Christ has created worlds without number. As far as we are concerned, we know of no other God other than Christ and His Father.
Okay. One of the questions that, well, I don't have time to look it up here. But,
Well, I'll just give you the answer.
Well, Alma, it was very great having you with us. Great pleasure, privilege to have you. We will be back next week with more. We hope to have Alma on in the future if he is willing to do that.
Be happy to.
Once again, my name is Jason Wallace. I am the pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church, and hope you'll be back with us next week on the Ancient Past. Good night.